Hey guys, tonight we drift into the soft fabric of deep time, a time far older than the skyscrapers outside your window or the glowing screen you're holding right now. Picture this, a quiet Earth under a tapestry of unfamiliar stars. No cities, no internet, no noise, just the sound of wind brushing across endless landscapes. You're standing barefoot on ancient soil, staring up at constellations you recognize, despite the hundreds of thousands of years separating you from what we call now. Your brain? Just as sharp as anyone's today. You could fall asleep in a Tesla, joke around on TikTok, or write the next hit fantasy novel, if, those things existed. But here's the twist. Back then, maybe they did have their own versions. Strange tools, advanced knowledge, and possibly a civilization we've all forgotten. You probably won't survive this revelation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where my listeners are drifting off from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You think you're living in the most advanced version of Earth to ever exist. The pinnacle, the apex, the grand finale. After all, there are AIs doing your homework, satellites mapping your footsteps, and robots vacuuming your floor while you binge reality TV. And sure, it feels impressive, but tonight, a little voice inside your head starts to whisper something radical. What if this isn't the first time humans got this far? What if we're just the reboot? You glance around your high-tech surroundings and chuckle. Nah, impossible. But then again, somewhere deep in your brain, something tugs. A pattern, an echo. You look at the stars and wonder, haven't we done this before? All over the world, scattered like cosmic breadcrumbs, are structures and ruins that just don't line up with our tidy historical timeline. Places carved in stone before we were supposed to know how to farm. Temples built before pottery existed. Cities now underwater, when no cities should be. You might have seen the headlines. Massive stones in Peru that fit together tighter than puzzle pieces, or strange sunken walls off India's coast. Every one of them pokes a little hole in our story of how humanity unfolded. And if you listen closely enough, they whisper something kind of terrifying. We may not be the first ones here, and we may not be the last. Let's get something straight. History, the kind you learn in school, isn't lying to you. It's just edited. It's based on what survives, which is mostly stone. And stone doesn't lie, but it doesn't explain itself either. So we interpret, we guess, we fill in the blanks. And in doing so, we've convinced ourselves we started from scratch just 6,000 years ago. Anything older must be primitive, must be irrelevant, must be forgotten. But you, brave insomniac, are beginning to question that. You look at your phone, see the speed at which we've advanced in the past century alone, and you ask, if we've done this much in 100 years, what could someone else have done in 100,000? That's not just a late-night thought spiral. That's a valid question, because you're not alone in wondering. Historians still argue whether our official timeline ignores massive gaps in human progress. And more, the anomalies are stacking up. You think of Göbekli Tepe, those colossal stone circles in Turkey, over 11,000 years old, predating agriculture. That place shouldn't exist, and yet it does. It's like someone pressed start on civilization and then hit delete. But the file wasn't wiped clean, just buried, waiting, or Mount Padang, a grassy hill in Indonesia that's possibly hiding chambers built 20,000 years ago. That number makes archaeologists sweat, because if it's true, it means people were organizing labor, carving massive stones, and aligning structures with cosmic patterns while mammoths still walk the earth. Elephant. And yet, your textbooks are still stuck in Mesopotamia. Imagine this. Earth isn't a linear story. It's a palimpsest, a manuscript scraped and written over again and again, layer on layer. Some ink fading, some still bold, and others lost entirely. Every time we collapse, the survivors rebuild. But what if we forget a little more each time? Maybe we're not on level 1. Maybe we're on level 7. And the earlier levels? buried under oceans, jungles, deserts, and doubt. The scary part? Those earlier civilizations might have been taken out by the very forces we're flirting with now. Climate shifts, resource collapse, or maybe a cosmic tantrum from the sky. Comet historians still debate whether a comet caused the Younger Dryas cooling period, disrupting early human settlements. If that's true, it might explain why we keep finding traces of something advanced that suddenly disappeared. And so, tonight, as you curl beneath your blanket and feel the weight of that long timeline pressing on your thoughts, you start to see the truth flicker behind your closed eyelids. Maybe this isn't the golden age. Maybe it's just another round. And maybe, just maybe, someone somewhere once laid down under a sky like this, on a planet like this, wondering the same thing about us. You step back, way back, not by decades or centuries, but by hundreds of thousands of years. Your surroundings dissolve into silence as you slip into the deep past, long before agriculture, before writing, before even the idea of a kingdom existed. The wind is cooler, sharper. The stars above are just as bright, but there's no light pollution to dim their glow. You're walking side by side with humans who look just like you. Same bone structure, same intelligence, same brain built for storytelling, music, patterns, and problem solving. The only difference? Their timeline has been erased. You're standing in the shoes of a Homo sapien born 300,000 years ago. Weird, right? You expect them to grunt or throw a rock at you, but they wouldn't. If raised in our world, they'd post on Reddit, worry about taxes, and probably still be confused by the settings on a microwave. You're not dealing with some barely upright proto-human. You're dealing with you, just in a time before Google Maps. Now here's where things get awkward. The modern narrative says this highly capable human, you, did practically nothing of note for 294,000 years. You supposedly hunted and gathered in small groups, maybe poked a stick into a fire now and then, but didn't really get around to civilization until the last 6,000 years. Really? With all that cognitive horsepower? Let's break that down. If all of human history were a 2-hour movie, the first 98 minutes would be blank. And only in the final 2 do we suddenly invent cities. Languages, pyramids, poetry, and Wi-Fi. That doesn't sound like a well-paced story. That sounds like a glitch in the script. Evolution doesn't just toss us a fully loaded brain and say, use it in 290,000 years, no rush. Biology doesn't work that way. If our brains reached modern complexity that long ago, they were being used for art, for navigation, for ritual, for understanding the seasons, the skies, and each other. But almost none of that survived. Not because it wasn't happening, but because it couldn't last. Historians still argue whether civilization began late, or if we've just lost the earlier chapters. The problem isn't that people didn't build, invent, or explore. It's that almost everything they made was biodegradable. Language, music, stories, beliefs, those don't leave fossils. Leather rots, wood crumbles, cities made of natural materials disappear. Add in floods, volcanoes, erosion, and forests, and poof, 10,000 years later, it's like you were never there. So you sit with this thought. If most of humanity's timeline is invisible, then our understanding of prehistory might be based entirely on what didn't get destroyed. That's like judging a person's life by the shoes they left behind, but ignoring their voice. Their laughter, their heartbreak. Want proof people were up to something? Let's talk cave art. You imagine some guy scribbling stick figures while hiding from a saber-toothed tiger. But reality is way cooler. Some of the oldest cave paintings, like the ones in Sulawesi, Indonesia, are over 45,000 years old. These aren't childish scrawls. They're vivid animal portraits, hand stencils, even early attempts at motion and storytelling. Some seem to record lunar cycles or migration patterns. That's not doodling. That's science. That's culture. And it gets weirder. In Blombo's cave, South Africa, someone etched repeating geometric patterns into stone 70,000 years ago. Deliberate, consistent, maybe even symbolic. These weren't just bored humans passing time. They were encoding ideas. They were building memory. Here's the kicker. Historians still debate whether these markings mean culture, but why wouldn't they? If we found the same carvings on Mars, we'd scream aliens into every microphone we could find. But because it's Earth, and because it doesn't fit our tidy timeline, we hesitate. Now imagine all the things that didn't survive. Fabric dyes, music traditions, spiritual chants, systems of governance that didn't rely on stone temples. You start to feel the weight of what we've lost. And you start to see early humans as more than scavengers. They were explorers of mind and meaning. They were poets with no paper, engineers with no metal. If someone gave you a planet with 300,000 years of humans on it and said, figure out what happened, you wouldn't start with, well, they did nothing until 6,000 years ago. You'd assume there were rises and falls, experiments, failures, civilizations built from clay and bamboo that didn't stand a chance against time. And that's the real issue. We treat the absence of evidence as evidence of absence. But maybe it's just evidence of nature doing what nature does, sweeping the slate clean again and again. So you lie back in the grass of this imagined past, staring at the same stars your ancient twin once did. You wonder if they told stories about constellations too. You wonder if they saw meaning in the sky. Maybe they tracked the moon, marked seasons, danced during eclipses. Maybe they whispered myths we've never heard. Historians still argue whether oral traditions could preserve memory for tens of thousands of years. But cultures today still recite myths that go back unbroken for millennia. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia have Dreamtime stories they claim stretch back 40,000 years. Some of those stories describe coastlines that haven't existed since the last ice age. So who are we to dismiss those memories? Who are we to say the long stretch of human experience before writing was blank and boring? You begin to realize that prehistory isn't a chapter before the story began. It is the story, just told in a language we forgot how to read. You wake, not in your bed, but in a forest, dense, quiet, timeless. The trees stretch impossibly tall above you, their canopies blotting out the stars. There's no sign of modern life here. No glass, no metal, no glowing screens. But as your eyes adjust, you begin to see subtle hints, patterns in the soil, strange rock arrangements. The outline of something once built and long surrendered to nature. You kneel, brush aside leaves, and there it is, stone buried forgotten. That's the thing about history. We assume it's written in stone, but most of it isn't. You've heard that history only began when humans started recording it. But that's just what survived. Most of the evidence of early humanity was never meant to endure the slow grind of time. And yet, here you are, kneeling in what might be the footprint of a lost life. Maybe even a forgotten civilization. The truth is, we only know what sticks around, and stone sticks best. Not beliefs, not clothing, baskets, or wooden homes. Not oral traditions or knowledge passed in songs and dances. Just the hard stuff, literally. So when we paint early humans as simple, it's not because they were, it's because what they made didn't fossilize. You start walking, carefully, watching the ground, the trees, even the way the terrain rises unnaturally in one spot. It feels intentional. You wonder how many forests you've driven past that might be hiding something beneath. Something extraordinary. Maybe even someone's home. Survival bias shapes everything we know about the past. You've heard the term before. How we overlook failures because we only see the survivors. In history, it's worse. We only study what remains. But what if most of it, 99%, maybe more, is already gone? How much did we lose just because it was made of wood instead of granite? Take early dwellings. You've been taught to imagine them as caves. Maybe rough huts, but in wet, forested areas, like most of the world, people would have built from trees, reeds, hides, or clay. Structures that decay quickly unless sealed in volcanic ash or bogs, which almost never happens. So we find no cities, no ruins, no tools, and assume they didn't exist. It's like walking into a house that's just burned down and concluding there were never any books. Just because you can't find any. Of course they had books. They just turned to ash. Historians still argue whether this survival bias is skewing our entire timeline, whether we're underestimating just how much complex human behavior was happening long before writing. And every year, new discoveries nudge the needle. Stone tools older than we expected, cave art with symbolic depth, calendrical knowledge carved into ancient bone. It's all adding up to a quieter, deeper narrative. Let's zoom in for a second. You reach a cliffside, and carved into the rock is an ochre painting of a deer. Graceful, accurate, almost spiritual. Next to it, a series of dots and lines arranged in ways that look eerily like data. You don't need a PhD to feel it. This isn't decoration. It's information. You're looking at a proto-calendar, maybe a tracking system for migration or the moon. That kind of symbolic abstraction, compressing life into visuals, takes serious brain power. It means whoever made this wasn't just surviving. They were thinking. Think about your own day. You track time, notice patterns, anticipate outcomes, solve problems, build routines. That's what these ancestors were doing. But instead of writing apps or spreadsheets, they scratched it into bone or drew it on walls. No less meaningful, just harder to preserve. Now picture this. You're part of a small tribe 40,000 years ago. You live near a river. Every spring, a certain bird returns. And when it does, you know the rains will follow and the fish will be plentiful. So you carve a bird into stone. You tell your children what it means. They tell theirs. Over generations, it becomes a symbol, a cultural cornerstone. But what happens when the tribe moves? When the river floods? When the forest reclaims your home? Your bird becomes just another rock. Your story is lost, until some curious human thousands of years later finds it, scratches their head, and calls it primitive art. We're obsessed with what's big, what's bold, what's carved in granite. But complexity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it whispers. And whispers, unfortunately, don't survive the millennia unless someone is listening very carefully. You keep walking and find a series of stones arranged in a spiral. Not random. Definitely not natural. You feel in your chest this meant something. Was it a gathering place? A sacred space? A calendar? A map? You'll never know for sure. But the shape sings with intention. There's a phrase archaeologists use when they don't understand something. Ritual use. It's a polite shrug. A placeholder for mystery. But what if those rituals were actual technologies? What if their systems of belief were tied to cycles of the Earth, astronomical alignments, even early science? Historians still debate whether belief systems in early cultures were more than superstition. Maybe even early methods of storing data, social structure, or natural knowledge. Because when you don't write things down, you remember them together. Songs become instruction manuals. Myths become ethics. Ceremonies become community clocks. And yet, none of that leaves a trace unless someone happens to fossilize it or carve it into stone. So when we look back, it's easy to underestimate. Easy to call them simple. But you, walking through this imaginary forest, start to see the truth. The intelligence was always there. It just didn't have a USB port. You pause under a wide tree, the wind moving through its leaves like breath. You close your eyes and imagine what the world must have sounded like. No machines, no engines, just nature and language and song. It would have been beautiful, but it would have been temporary, which is why almost none of it survived. Still, every now and then we find something. A bone flute in a cave. A fire pit arranged in a way that suggests planning. A burial site that hints at emotional bonds. They don't scream civilization, but they whisper meaning. And if there's meaning, there's culture. You sit now, cross-legged, feeling the deep time silence fill your bones. You begin to understand that what's missing from history isn't evidence of intelligence. It's evidence that intelligence doesn't always fossilize. So maybe the real question isn't, why didn't early humans do more? Maybe it's, why do we assume they didn't? The cave is colder than you expect. The stone under your fingertips is slick, damp, and alive with echoes. Echoes that have nothing to do with sound and everything to do with memory. Your eyes adjust slowly, pulling shapes from the walls. You're deep inside one of those sacred places the kind that still holds secrets from thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of years ago. Then you see them. The figures on the wall aren't childlike scribbles. They're vivid, deliberate, filled with movement. Bison charging, horses galloping, human hands, not as prints, but as stencils, paint sprayed around open palms, immortalizing the shape of a body that once knelt here, just like you. It's humbling, not in a poetic sense, but in a punch-you-in-the-chest kind of way, because you realize something right away. Whoever painted this wasn't just trying to decorate. They were trying to say something. You trace one handprint with your own. It fits. You could have been them. And if that doesn't make you shiver, nothing will. These are messages, not murals. Warnings, stories, ideas, flashed on a stone in the only language guaranteed to outlive the speaker. And it worked. You're standing here 40,000 years later, and you hear them. Historians still argue whether these ancient paintings were purely artistic, religious, or scientific. Some believe they mark successful hunts or animal migrations. Others say they were ritualistic, meant to summon the spirit of the hunt or connect with something divine. But the truth? We'll never know for sure. All we have are symbols. Some of the oldest cave art we've found, like in Sulawesi and Chauvet, dates back over 45,000 years. That's older than the Ice Age cave bears whose bones lie on the same floor. And it wasn't just one group doing this. Across Europe, Africa, Southeast Asia, these ancient humans were expressing something, independently, across time and continents. That points to a shared cognitive language, not in spoken words, but in the way humans saw the world and needed to reflect it. So you crawl deeper into the cave, and the drawings evolve. Animals give way to shapes, shapes to dots, dots to lines, and suddenly, you're looking at what some believe might be early calendars. Phase tracking, lunar cycles, evidence of pattern recognition, even abstract mathematics. It's not algebra, but it's intention. And this is the moment when your idea of primitive dies for good. They weren't drawing for fun. They were thinking, recording, teaching, maybe even predicting. Take the cave in France, known as Lascaux. Its paintings are not just beautiful, they align with star constellations. Constellations, that's not just culture, that's cosmology. Still, we treat it as accidental. We assume these early people just happen to make art that looks organized. But over and over again, we find the same shapes, same alignments, same themes. And when patterns repeat across thousands of miles and centuries, they aren't coincidences. They're culture. Let's pause here for a second. You're in that cave with a torch in your hand. The flame flickers against the wall, and you can feel what they might have felt. This need to say we were here. We saw the world. We understood something. But now imagine you didn't have paint or stone. Imagine your culture passed everything down through voice and gesture, not pigment and pigment. What would remain? Nothing. Unless someone buried it in a cave like this. And that's the problem. We give the title of civilized to the ones who carved stone, because stone is what survives. But who's to say the ones who danced under starlight and tracked seasons through song weren't equally advanced in their way? Historians still debate how far back complex oral tradition can go. Some argue that certain indigenous songs and mythologies preserve actual events from over 10,000 years ago. Think about that. A memory passed down, uninterrupted from mouth to ear, for over 400 generations. You walk farther in, and the paintings change again. Now, you see handprints with missing fingers. Some interpret these as signs of injury. Others believe they represent coded language, even numbers. A few fringe researchers have speculated they're proto-systems of notation, a kind of sign language. Whatever they are, they weren't random. And randomness, as you now understand, is not the currency of survival. These caves weren't just decorated. They were archives. Then there's the mystery of red ochre. This reddish pigment shows up everywhere, from South Africa to Spain. It was used in cave art, burials, and rituals. Some call it the first universal color of humanity. Others suggest it symbolized life, death, or blood. But what's really wild is that red ochre deposits have been mined, deliberately, in caves, by people who, according to our timelines, shouldn't have had mining technology yet. So let's just say it plainly. There was intention. There was planning. There was industry. And it happened long before we carved the first wheel or shaped the first pot. You step back toward the mouth of the cave, squinting against the first light of dawn. Outside, the world feels a little different. You understand now that early humans didn't just drift aimlessly through millennia. They were watching the skies, mapping cycles, marking time in stone and firelight. They lived with a depth we've only begun to rediscover. So why don't we hear more about this? Because our history books are written in ink, and these stories are written in dust. And we've always favored the loud, the durable, the obvious. But knowledge, real knowledge, it often arrives in whispers. And these caves, these quiet, sacred places, they're whispering still. All you have to do is listen. You feel the shift before you see it. The air grows thicker, saltier. The soundscape changes. Waves crashing faintly in the distance. Gulls wheeling above. Wind brushing across an open expanse. You're not in the forest anymore. You're standing on a shoreline. But not just any shoreline. The edge of something ancient, something that no longer exists. Now, close your eyes. Picture the world 12,000 years ago. The last ice age is melting away like a forgotten memory. Glaciers are retreating, the temperatures rising, and sea levels, they're beginning to climb. Not by inches, not slowly. And if humans were already settled along coastlines, as we still are today, what do you think happened to their cities? They vanished, swallowed not by fire or war, but by time and tide. You walk closer to the water. Waves lap at your ankles. But this isn't just beach, it's a graveyard. Not of people, but of places. Because underneath these waves lies a story we rarely tell. The one about the cities beneath the sea. Historians still argue whether we've underestimated the number of early coastal civilizations. But given that over half the human population today lives within 60 kilometers of a coast, it's not much of a leap to assume our ancient ancestors did too. Especially when those same coasts were once dry, fertile land before the oceans reclaimed them. The problem is the sea isn't kind to memory. You can't just dust off the ocean floor and find a lost temple. Salt water corrodes, sediment buries, coral overtakes, and then there's the cost, the sheer difficulty of exploring underwater archaeology. It's cold, deep, dangerous, and expensive. But even so, clues keep surfacing. Off the coast of India, near the modern city of Dwarka, sonar has revealed submerged structures, walls, roads, possible platforms. They sit beneath the Arabian Sea in patterns too geometric to be natural. Some pottery samples nearby date back at least 7,000 years. And some believe this could be the lost city described in Hindu epics. Not metaphor, memory. Further west, near the coast of Israel, you find it Lit Yam, a Neolithic village now submerged beneath the Mediterranean. Divers discovered it in the 1980s. It includes wells, dwellings, a ritual burial site. And it's old, 9,000 years at least. They even found skeletons, their DNA still whispering clues about who these people were. Then there's Pavlopetri off the southern coast of Greece, a city beneath the sea. Roads, courtyards, buildings laid out with the kind of urban planning we didn't think existed that early. And yet, there it is, clear as day when viewed through crystal blue water. And it keeps going. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument stirs controversy. Is it natural? Is it modified? The structure, massive, geometric, and deeply submerged, sits like a stone riddle on the ocean floor. Some surfaces look polished. Others are stepped, shaped, aligned. Historians still argue whether it's the remains of an ancient platform or a very convenient pile of rocks. But it doesn't quite behave like nature normally does. You crouch on a rocky shoreline and let the waves touch your fingertips. And it hits you. This isn't science fiction. This isn't a movie. These are real places, real cities that existed until the water came. Imagine watching the sea inch closer every year. You retreat, rebuild, retreat again, and eventually you give up. Your world is buried beneath waves. Your temples, your plazas, your stories, all lost. Not destroyed, drowned. And the scary part? They didn't just disappear. They were forgotten. We call it prehistory, not because nothing happened, but because we don't have their version of Google Docs. No scrolls, no inscriptions, just ruins. And not even dry ruins, wet ruins, which are even harder to date, harder to study, harder to believe. Historians still debate how many such places are out there. But we've only explored a tiny fraction, maybe 5 to 10%, of the ocean floor with serious archaeological intent. That's like trying to understand a novel after reading one paragraph. So the question isn't, did civilizations exist before our written record? The question is, how many of them are now sleeping beneath the waves? The sea is like a vault, a vast, heavy lockbox filled with forgotten chapters. It erases with elegance. Soft, unstoppable. But every now and then, it offers up a piece, a stone, a column, a trace of a path once walked. And here's the wildest part. These aren't the only places. Sonar scans off the coast of Cuba have hinted at large structures 600 meters underwater, way too deep to have been submerged in the last 10,000 years unless something dramatic happened. That site's still hotly contested, but it's there, sitting, waiting. You wonder, could those legends, Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, actually be refracted echoes of real, drowned places? Maybe not as described in myth, but real enough that someone watched them vanish. Real enough that the trauma carved itself into story. Because that's what humans do. We turn disaster into narrative. We preserve catastrophe as warning. And we tell it again and again. There was a flood, the myths whisper. The land disappeared. Only a few survived. It doesn't matter if you're reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Bible, or Aboriginal Dreamtime stories. They all speak of a deluge, a reset, a civilization erased by water. Not fire, not war, but by a tide that never stopped rising. You rise from your crouch, brushing sand from your hands, and look out to sea. You can't help but wonder, what's out there, just beneath the surface? A city with walls still standing? A temple still facing east? A name we've forgotten? Maybe that's the most important idea of all, that we've misunderstood the silence beneath the waves. Not as emptiness, but as suppression. The earth didn't forget. It just covered. And if history is a story written by survivors, then the sea has silenced millions of authors. But not forever, because you listening now have heard them. The echoes, the warnings, the waves, and they're only just starting to speak. You're drifting now, not just in thought, but in time, carried softly along the current of imagination and memory, deeper into that drowned world. The shoreline fades behind you as your feet sink into warm, ancient sands that once held laughter, footsteps, and firelight. The tide pulls gently, but you don't resist. You follow, because tonight, we're going under. You imagine yourself as one of them, an ancient coastal dweller, part of a thriving settlement perched beside the sea. Your people track the tides. You know the constellations. You gather shellfish from tidal pools. You raise structures from wood, from reed, from stone. Your community sings at sunrise and harvests in rhythm with the moon. You live where land and water meet, not as boundary, but as harmony. But then, slowly, something shifts. The sea is changing. Inch by inch, season by season, it creeps in. First, it eats away at the fields, then the graves, then the homes. You move uphill. You move again. But the ocean doesn't stop. It never stops. And one day, you don't come back. Your town vanishes beneath waves. Not overnight, but gradually, relentlessly, until the only things left are memories and myths. Now, from your modern vantage point, you look back and ask, how many towns like this were lost? How many villages, ports, and sacred places were swallowed whole? Historians still argue whether the bulk of early settlements were coastal. But logic, geography, and even today's population distribution say yes. Water is life. Rivers, bays, estuaries, they offer food, transport, trade, and fertility. Why wouldn't ancient people have built where life was easiest? And if they did, then a massive portion of our early human story now lies at the bottom of oceans. Undocumented, undisturbed, unstudied. You close your eyes and picture a map of the world. Now raise the sea levels by 400 feet. Entire swaths of Southeast Asia disappear. Parts of India and the Middle East vanish. The British Isles shrink. Florida's gone. So is much of the Gulf Coast. Every harbor, every river delta, every low-lying settlement from the Ice Age is now a memory underwater. And with it, knowledge. You've probably heard of the Bering Land Bridge, the stretch of land that once connected Siberia to Alaska, now submerged beneath the Bering Sea. But did you know there were others? Doggerland, for example, once connected Britain to mainland Europe. It wasn't just a strip of land. It was a rich ecosystem with rivers, forests, and likely human habitation. Today it's gone, swallowed by the North Sea. But sonar scans have revealed traces, ancient riverbeds, submerged forests, even the bones of mammoths. And stone tools, human-made, real artifacts from a land that no longer exists. Think about that. An entire country-sized region where people lived is now forgotten. Not because it was unimportant, but because the sea decided otherwise. You walk now, underwater in your mind, across what used to be a village. You see doorways, pathways, the faint outline of a circular plaza. Coral clings to what might have been a hearth. Fish dart through what was once a child bedroom. You don't need Atlantis to make this magical. The reality is strange enough. And here's where it gets even stranger. Across cultures that supposedly never met, we find myths of lands lost to the sea. Atlantis, yes, but also Lemuria in the Indian Ocean, Kumari Kandam from ancient Tamil lore, Mu in the Pacific. The Maya had their flood story. So did the Hopi, the Celts, the Babylonians, the Yoruba. Almost every culture has some version of a world swallowed by water. Historians still debate whether these myths are symbolic, metaphors, moralititales. But what if they're memory? What if their trauma retold a story? You lose your world. You try to explain it to your children. The sky cracked open. The oceans rose. The gods were angry. Only a few survived. Sound familiar? We do the same today. Wrap catastrophe in narrative. Make sense of tragedy with story. How much easier is it to say the sea took it than to chart melting glaciers and isostatic rebound? You float through this idea like you're drifting above the ruins of Pavlopetri or at Lityam. It's haunting, but also beautiful, because in every sunken city, you glimpse humanity's most profound trait, persistence. We don't just live, we remember, but sometimes memory fails. Sometimes it gets too quiet, too deep, and then it becomes legend. Even now, in the age of satellites and submarines, most of the ocean floor remains unexplored. It's the final archaeological frontier. We search deserts and jungles for temples, but ignore what might lie off the coasts, because diving is hard, because the ocean hides its secrets well. But here and there, the whispers break through. In the Gulf of Cambay, off western India, sonar scans once revealed a city-like grid submerged deep beneath the sea. Stone walls, possible roads, pottery dredged up and dated to over 9,000 years old. That's older than the Indus Valley civilization, older than Mesopotamia. Skeptics point out the uncertainties in dating, and they're right to be cautious. But the structures are there, and so is the possibility that our version of first cities is missing entire chapters. Maybe it's not that civilization began 6,000 years ago. Maybe that's just the last time it began. You float, now fully submerged in the idea that history is not a steady climb, but a series of swells and drownings. That we build, we rise, we fall, we rebuild, and that each time, we remember a little less. The final thought slips in like a tide at midnight. If we lost entire cities to the sea once, what's stopping it from happening again? You're on a hillside now, somewhere warm, maybe tropical. The sun is rising over dense green vegetation, casting gold over the earth beneath your feet. From above, the slope looks natural enough. A simple hill, maybe even just a nice place for a picnic. But you've learned to squint at the world, to look sideways at the ordinary. Because hills don't always grow from dirt. Sometimes they're made. You dig your fingers into the earth. Only a few inches down, the soil changes. It's not just loam and clay, it's stone. Carved, placed, ancient. You're standing on something built. Welcome to Mount Padang, Indonesia. Or at least what looks like a mountain. The surface is scattered with massive stone columns, arranged in terraces. Archaeologists long believed it was just a megalithic site on a natural hill. But deeper scans? They told a different story. Below the visible surface, layer after layer, lie chambers and construction phases potentially dating back 20,000 years. Not a typo. Not 2,000. 20,000. You pause. Let that number settle. If those layers really are man-made, they push back the start of monumental architecture by at least 10,000 years. That's before pottery, before writing, before agriculture, supposedly, before almost everything. Historians still argue whether Mount Padang is truly artificial at its deepest levels. The research is still in progress. There's debate, disagreement, but the sheer possibility that a site this complex, this old, could exist shakes our timeline like an earthquake. And it's not alone. All across the planet, you find hills that feel a little too symmetrical, too flat on top, too aligned with the stars. In Bosnia, there's Visoko, claimed by some to be a giant pyramid hidden under vegetation. Mainstream archaeologists dismiss it, but local legends persist. Ground scans reveal unusual features. Stone blocks, tunnels patterns that don't quite scream natural. You've probably heard the same debate about the Sphinx. Is it 4,500 years old? Or older? Much older? Some geologists claim the water erosion on its flanks could only have come from sustained rainfall, not wind, which would date it to at least 9,000 years ago when the Sahara was a fertile savanna. Historians still debate whether erosion patterns can reliably redate monuments. But the point remains, we don't know what we don't know. And more, it looks like the past was busier than we gave it credit for. You crouch near a boulder on Mount Padang's upper terrace. It's not smooth. It's been shaped, sharpened corners, deliberate placement. Almost like a key in a lock. You look around and notice that the stones follow lines. Long lines, as if forming geometric patterns visible only from above. So who built this? And why? You imagine a people who saw the land not as something to tame, but something to cooperate with. Who didn't just build on top of hills, but turned hills into temples. Sacred mountains, stone calendars, places of power. We think of ancient construction as crude, but we forget something vital. Precision doesn't always need technology. It needs patience, and knowledge, and purpose. You remember Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, another megalithic site older than farming. Carved stone pillars, up to 20 tons each, arranged in careful circles. Animal carvings, symbolism, complex alignments, and, most baffling of all, intentionally buried, as if the builders wanted it hidden. Mount Padang may be the same. Every layer adds mystery. Every scan deepens the riddle. And it challenges the idea that complexity came after agriculture. What if it was the cause of it? What if people built temples first and learned to farm because they needed to stay near them? You let that inversion settle in your mind. We always assumed food led to religion, but maybe it was the other way around. Think about how sacred places unify people today. Pilgrimages, festivals, shared stories. If your ancestors built a place that felt connected to the heavens, wouldn't you want to stick around? You touch another stone. It's cool, smooth, resting quietly in the sun like a sleeping thought. All over the world, there are other hills like this. Teep sites in Turkey, tells in the Middle East, even some Native American mounds in North America that predate the arrival of Europeans by thousands of years, some possibly ceremonial, some astronomical. And each one asks the same quiet question. What came before? What if the land isn't rising to meet the sky, but covering something ancient, something sacred? What if we spent centuries climbing mountains, never realizing we were walking on rooftops? The joke you think is on us. We paved over the past because it didn't look like the stories we wrote, because it was too early, because it was too different. And yet, the ground beneath you says otherwise. You stand again, brushing dirt from your hands. The wind moves through the grass, whistling between stone columns like a voice lost in time. The place feels heavy, not with sadness, but with knowledge. As if it's waiting, not for archaeologists, not for headlines, but for someone who sees it for what it is. So you keep walking, past natural hills, past grassy slopes, past the illusion of emptiness. Because now you understand. The earth remembers, even when we forget. You step on a dry earth again, rocky, sun-blasted terrain stretching beneath an open sky. Dust swirls at your ankles, kicked up by an invisible wind as you approach a place both barren and strangely alive. Stone circles rise ahead, arranged with eerie precision. No buildings, no walls, just pillars. Carved, massive, haunting. You've arrived at Göbekli Tepe. It's not flashy at first glance. No gold, no thrones, just weathered limestone standing in arcs and rings. But the longer you stand here, the louder the place becomes. These aren't random stones. They're messages in rock, and they're old. Over 11,000 years old. In fact, older than writing, older than the wheel, older even than agriculture. That single detail flips your understanding of history on its head. Because according to everything you've been told, you're standing in the middle of a temple that was built before people knew how to grow grain. Let that land. A temple, before farming. It's like finding a shopping mall before electricity. Or a smartphone made by cavemen. It's not just surprising, it's paradigm breaking. Historians still argue whether Göbekli Tepe is truly a temple. Some think it might have been a social hub. Others believe it marked celestial patterns. But no one questions its significance. This site shouldn't exist, and yet, here it is. Real, immense, beautiful. You walk between the T-shaped pillars. They're smooth to the touch. Each one features carvings. Lions, boars, birds, snakes. Symbols of power, fear, fertility, maybe even cosmology. You're struck by how stylized they are. Not crude or awkward, but intentional, sophisticated, iconic. You could mistake one for a modern sculpture if you found it in a museum. Which makes sense. These people weren't dumb. They were just early. That a big difference. You turn slowly, letting the layout of the site reveal itself. Concentric rings. Larger stones in the middle, smaller ones around. Not accidental. Not utilitarian. Ceremonial. Ritualistic. Symbolic. This wasn't a shelter. This was sacred. But here's the twist. Göbekli Tepe wasn't built all at once. The site was expanded and remodeled across generations, maybe centuries. Different layers lie beneath, each older than the last. You get the sense of tradition here, of people returning again and again to add, reshape, honor. And then one day, they buried it. On purpose. You pause on that thought. Because the builders didn't abandon the site. They didn't leave it to decay. They filled it in. Carefully, deliberately, like tucking a child in for sleep, or sealing a vault. Why? Historians still debate this mystery. Was it ritual? A farewell to something sacred? Or an effort to preserve knowledge? To hide it from invaders? Or from time itself? You bend and pick up a small stone. It's nothing special, just a chunk of ancient debris. But as you hold it, you start to see the world through different eyes. If people 11,000 years ago could build this, without wheels, without cranes, without metal tools, what else were they capable of? And more importantly, what else have we missed? Göbekli Tepe isn't alone. There are other Tepe sites, Karahan Tepe, Sefer Tepe, Taz Tepeler, all scattered across the same region. Each one hints at a network, a culture, a shared worldview. Not isolated tribes, but coordinated builders. It suggests something far more organized than we're comfortable admitting. Something older than cities, but deeply urban in spirit. Something that challenges the neat timeline we love so much. You've heard that civilization began with farming, that people planted wheat, stayed put, and then built cities. But what if it happened the other way around? What if people gathered here first, to worship, to celebrate, to mourn, and then realized they needed to stay? What if they farmed to feed their ceremonies? That turns history upside down. You look at the carvings again. A headless man, a vulture, a scorpion. These aren't just animals, they're symbols. They meant something, even if we've forgotten what. And they speak to a mind capable of abstraction. Myth, memory, science. Because it's not just about building big, it's about building meaning. You glance upward, the stars are out, and you wonder, did these stones once align with constellations? Was this place an observatory, a clock, a shrine to the turning heavens? Archaeoastronomers think so. Some alignments suggest solstice tracking. Others hint at Sirius rising. And that's when you feel it again. That whisper, they knew things. We forgot them. You turn to leave, but the stones seem to watch you. Quiet, still, waiting. Göbekli Tepe isn't famous for nothing. It's not just the earliest temple we've found. It's a question mark carved in limestone. It forces us to rethink everything. What it means to be civilized. What it means to be ancient. What it means to begin. And it's just one piece of a larger puzzle. So you step off the sacred ground, and you keep walking. Because if this much wonder lies in one place, what else is waiting to be found? The air shifts again. Drier now. Lighter. You descend from the sun-baked stones of Göbekli Tepe and find yourself in softer terrain. Not dusty and ancient, but fresh. Like a place deliberately cared for, tended, but oddly empty. You're walking across buried memory. The earth beneath your feet isn't a ruin. It's a time capsule. And unlike broken cities lost to war or decay, this place wasn't destroyed. It was intentionally hidden. You crouch, fingertips grazing the soil. Imagine digging. Just a few feet down and you'd hit pillars. Those same mighty stones from sacred spaces, locked beneath thousands of pounds of fill. Layered, protected, tucked away like something precious. And that's exactly what happened at Göbekli Tepe. But it wasn't alone. All across the region, archaeologists are finding other sites. Karahan Tepe, Harbetsuvin Tepe, Sefer Tepe, names unfamiliar to most, but echoing the same pattern. Sophisticated stonework, symmetrical layouts, deep-cut symbols, and purposeful burial. So you ask the natural question, why would anyone do that? Why bury something so monumental? Historians still argue whether it was an act of reverence, a ritual closure, or a survival strategy. But one thing is clear, it wasn't abandonment. It wasn't nature reclaiming what was hers. It was human hands hiding human work. Think of it like this. If you had a library of sacred knowledge, and your world was collapsing, what would you do? You wouldn't burn it. You wouldn't leave it exposed to time or enemies. You'd bury it. You'd guard it. You'd hope that someday, someone would dig and understand. You stand in the middle of what looks like nothing. A sheep trail, a patch of grass, a hot breeze. But you know what lies below? Carved snakes, solar alignments, stories in stone, maybe even a lost map of the sky. Because the builders of these places weren't just religious. They were astronomers, engineers, ritualists, maybe even scientists. They observed patterns in stars, in animals, in seasons. And they carved those patterns into permanence. And then, when the world changed, they sealed them away. You walk now with care. You understand that beneath what seems ordinary could be extraordinary. That the earth wears camouflage. And sometimes it conceals the very best of us. Look at Karahan Tepe, discovered after Göbekli. It shares the same T-shaped pillars, animal motifs, and circular architecture. But it has something different too. An underground chamber with a phallic stone sculpture and human heads carved into the walls. It's strange. It's intimate. It's not the work of nomads. Whoever did this had culture, had myth, had memory. Historians still debate whether these sites represent one unified civilization or scattered cultural siblings. But the repetition of form, of symbol, of burial suggests some kind of connection, a shared language spoken in limestone. Now consider the scale. These weren't just weekend projects. They took effort, community, vision, resources. And all this before cities, before iron, before the supposed dawn of real architecture. So who taught them to build? And why did they stop? You imagine a story. A golden age, not of tech, but of connection, where scattered groups gathered at sacred sites to mark solstices, honor ancestors, bind themselves together. Not an empire, not a kingdom, but a network. Spiritual, collaborative, old. And then something changed. A climate shift? A migration? A war? Whatever it was big enough to make them walk away. But not without care. Not without respect. They didn't leave rubble. They left capsules. They made sure the most important parts were protected. You think about time now, not just how it passes, but how it layers. Every generation builds on the last. But sometimes they bury it instead, like memory too painful to keep reading. So now, you're part of the story. You're one of the readers. You've brushed off the dust. You're listening to the voices that tried to echo forward. And they're saying, "We were here. We saw the stars. We knew things." You pause at the edge of a low hill. Looks like a regular mount. But after everything you've seen tonight, you know better. It might be a temple. It might be a calendar. It might be a classroom from 10,000 years ago. And it's waiting. You kneel. You place your hand on the ground. And for a moment, just one, you think you can hear it breathing. It's nighttime again. A perfect black sky stretches over you, unspoiled by city light. Stars blink like ancient messages. And you feel something in your bones, like you've returned to a place you've never been. You tilt your head up. The constellations look the same, but your understanding of them, different. Because now you know they weren't just decoration for ancient skies. They were guides, calendars, compasses, and maybe even something more. Tonight, we follow the stars, not through telescopes, but through temples. You begin walking, not in a straight line, but in a curve. A gentle spiral, like the kind etched into ancient stone, or plotted in the heavens. There's a truth here, soft but persistent. Our ancestors weren't blind to the cosmos. They were obsessed with it. From Egypt to Mesoamerica, from Cambodia to Scotland. You'll find structures built with incredible alignment to solar and lunar events. And they didn't guess. They knew. Knew when the solstices hit, when the stars shifted, when eclipses would come. Knew. Not in superstition, but in precision. Historians still argue whether these alignments were purely ceremonial or functional. Some say they tracked seasons for agriculture. Others believe they were symbolic, honoring deities tied to the heavens. But either way, the math checks out. The alignments are real. Start with Stonehenge. You've heard of it. You've probably seen it in textbooks or documentaries. A ring of massive stones in southern England, shrouded in mist and mystery. But what you may not realize is that it's not just a monument. It's a machine, a clock. On the summer solstice, the sun rises perfectly over the heel stone. That's not chance. That's architecture on a planetary scale. And it's not the only one. Travel west, and you'll find Newgrange in Ireland, 5,200 years old, older than the pyramids. Its entrance passage is aligned so that, during the winter solstice, the sunrise illuminates the inner chamber for just a few minutes each year. Imagine the awe of that moment. A room dark for 364 days bursts with golden light exactly when the days are darkest. A promise that light returns. You feel a chill, not from the air, but from the idea. Because this isn't luck, it's knowledge, and it repeats. Across the globe, in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, the ancestral Puebloans built structures aligned with the sun and moon. The Sun Dagger site features a rock spiral where light filters through a crevice to mark solstices and equinoxes. No writing system, no metal, just stone, shadow, and astonishing precision. Historians still debate how such alignments were measured. Did they use sight lines? Did they track shadows? Did they build models? We don't know, but they did it. And in doing so, they left behind a universal truth. Humans have always looked up, because the sky is the one constant. Seas rise, cities fall, mountains crumble, but the stars, they're always there, in the same place, in the same pattern. So ancient builders treated the sky like scripture. You walk now through a different set of ruins, this time in Nabta Playa, Egypt, long before the pyramids. These people erected a stone circle in the desert that marks true north and aligns with the summer solstice. Some even believe it may have tracked the precession of the equinoxes, an astronomical cycle that takes nearly 26,000 years. Let that sink in. If true, that means they weren't just watching the skies. They were recording deep time, knowledge that would require multiple generations of observation, continuity, and memory. And that brings you to a stranger idea. What if the oldest knowledge wasn't passed in books, but in stone? Stone that could survive ice ages, floods, empires, collapse. You pause. You look up again. Maybe the heavens weren't just watched. Maybe they were mirrored. Some researchers believe the 3 pyramids at Giza aligned with Orion's belt. That Teotihuacan's layout mimics the Milky Way. That Angkor, what is a reflection of the Draco constellation? Historians still argue over the accuracy of these claims. But you don't need confirmation to feel the wonder. These weren't buildings, they were messages. Star maps, written in architecture big enough to be seen from the sky. You're seeing it now, aren't you? The cosmos wasn't just a backdrop. It was a blueprint, and the builders were not guessing. They were remembering. You sit down back against the cool stone. Somewhere, you hear a distant owl, maybe an echo of a night thousands of years ago, when another person sat here, looking at the same stars. Only they knew what each one meant. They didn't name them like we do, but they honored them, tracked them, trusted them. Because in a world where you had no clocks, no phones, no data, the sky was everything. You wonder now, what if some of those patterns weren't just practical? What if they were warnings? Signals? A celestial ledger recording cycles of catastrophe and renewal? Because in ancient myths, the sky often plays a role in resets, floods following comets, darkness after alignments, destruction predicted by the stars. And maybe they didn't know why, but they knew when. And they left us the tools to know it too. You stand again. The night wraps around you, soft and endless. But now it feels full, not just with stars, but with meaning, with memory, with the silent echo of ancient minds who saw more than we give them credit for. So next time you look up, don't just gaze. Read. Because maybe the sky isn't just telling time. Maybe it's telling the truth. You wake up in the desert, not disoriented but tuned in. The sand is warm beneath you, the sun casting long, crisp shadows against dunes and ancient stone. You stand slowly, brushing off the dust, and realize you're not alone. In front of you, rising from the earth like a riddle, is a structure too precise, too massive, too impossible to ignore. You made it to Egypt, but not the Egypt you think you know. Forget Cleopatra. Forget Hollywood. Strip away the modern paint and peer beneath the script you've memorized since grade school. Because tonight, we're staring directly at the question that refuses to die. How did they build the pyramids? Yes, those pyramids. The Great Pyramid of Giza, in particular, continues to mock the limits of our modern understanding. It's not just old, it's ancient. More than 4,500 years have passed since it was erected, supposedly over 2 decades by a civilization without the wheel, iron tools, or cranes. Pause and picture it. 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 to 30 tons, aligned almost perfectly to true north. Its base level to within less than an inch. The placement's so precise that even today, architects and engineers still marvel and scratch their heads. Historians still argue whether ramps, manpower, and clever engineering can fully explain its creation. There are theories, sure, some more plausible than others, but no definitive blueprint. Just speculation. So you walk its perimeter. The scale isn't just huge. It's humbling. The stones dwarf you. They press into your mind as much as your senses. You start to wonder if these weren't just tombs, but messages. Messages carved not in words, but in weight. You enter one of the internal chambers. It's silent, cool, and perfectly aligned. The king's chamber. The air is still, like it's holding a breath it took 4 millennia ago. And here's where things get strange. The dimensions of the Great Pyramid, when converted using modern units, reflect constants: pi, the golden ratio, even the dimensions of Earth. Coincidence? Maybe, but it's an awfully long list of them. Some researchers believe the structure encodes astronomical, mathematical, and geodetic data. The Earth's radius, the precession of the equinoxes, even light speed. Is that overreach? Pattern seeking? Or did the ancient builders know more than we credit them for? Historians still debate whether these codes are real or retrofitted, but they keep surfacing, and not just here, in other ancient structures too. Alignments, measurements, geometry. You think back to that idea, that the stars weren't just watched, they were mirrored. That buildings weren't just shelters, they were statements. And maybe the pyramid is the boldest one of all. Now tilt your head upward. The Great Pyramid once shone. Its original casing stones, smooth, white Tura limestone, reflected sunlight so brightly that ancient people called it a kayat, or glorious light. At a distance, it must have looked like a beacon, a literal lighthouse, perhaps even a signal. To whom? You step back out into the sun, into the realm of speculation. Because here, the line between mystery and myth starts to blur. Could the pyramid have had a function beyond burial? Some suggest it may have been a power generator or a kind of resonant machine. Others laugh, but then remember that the structure contains no hieroglyphics, no definitive inscription linking it to Khufu. We assume it was his tomb, but it was already ancient when the Greeks were writing about it. Even the Sphinx, nearby, tells a conflicting story. Weathering patterns suggest water erosion, despite sitting in a desert. That implies rain, lots of it, which hasn't happened in that region for over 9,000 years. Historians still argue whether erosion can redate the monument. But again, the debate exists because something doesn't fit. The pieces we've been handed don't quite click into place. So maybe the builders weren't just Egyptian dynasties, but inheritors of something older. You imagine that now. A legacy of knowledge passed down across lost millennia. A blueprint remembered more than understood. Build this, they might have been told. It's sacred, not because of religion, but because of what it preserved. You run your hands along the stone, and it's cold, unyielding, immovable, like the truth. And still, there's no writing, no guide. Just wait. Massachusetts alignment. It reminds you of something. A tuning fork, a key, a monument not to death, but to understanding. You walk again, circling the pyramid like an orbiting moon. You think of how the structure mirrors Orion's belt, how it aligns with solstices, how its geometry reflects both heaven and earth. And now you see it clearly. It was never meant to tell you anything. It was meant to make you ask, what is buried beneath the obvious? What survives long after memory fades? What if the pyramids weren't built to glorify men, but to outlast them? You look out across the sand at the smaller pyramids, the ruined temples, the forgotten names. Time eats everything, except stone, except questions. And the Great Pyramid? It's still asking them. You leave the desert behind, but the questions follow you. They settle in the corners of your thoughts like dust in folds of fabric. Impossible to shake, hard to ignore. This time, you're walking through forested hills. Cool mist clings to your skin. The jungle buzzes with 1,000 whispers, and somewhere ahead, something massive waits. You brush aside vines, duck under thick branches, and there it is, a pyramid, but not of stone, not at first glance. It's green. It's covered in moss and trees, nearly indistinguishable from the landscape. But when you look closely, the slope is too straight. The corners too sharp. You step closer and the earth gives way to carved stone, half buried beneath centuries of silence. Welcome to the hidden temples of the jungle. Tonight, we're deep in the Americas where nature did something fascinating. It didn't destroy civilization. It hid it. From Guatemala to Mexico, Belize to Honduras, the ancient Maya built cities as grand and complex as any in the old world. Not a few temples, thousands, and most still buried. You're standing on one now. Historians still argue whether we've uncovered even 10% of the total Maya sites. Recent LiDAR scans, laser technology that strips away jungle, revealed over 60,000 previously unknown structures in northern Guatemala alone. Not scattered ruins, full cities, roads, causeways, fortifications, reservoirs. You sit on a stone step, now half consumed by roots. The symmetry of it still holds. This was architecture with purpose, not built to impress gods with grandeur, but to function. These cities had zoning, irrigation, solar alignment, mathematics. The Maya weren't guessing. They were calculating. Take the city of Tikal. From a distance, the temples rise above the canopy like stone ships frozen mid-sail. But underneath is an entire urban grid. Homes, markets, plazas, housing tens of thousands. Maybe more. And then there's El Mirador, a massive complex buried in the Pedon Basin. El Mirador is home to La Danta, one of the largest pyramids in the world by volume. Larger than Giza, heavier, older than most think. And we almost missed it. You lean into the stone, pressing your hand against it. The jungle around you buzzes louder. You wonder how many more pyramids are still out there, hidden, invisible, quiet under centuries of vines and bird calls. Historians still debate the cause of the Maya collapse. Was it drought, warfare, political instability, or something cyclical, as suggested by their own calendars? Whatever the reason, the cities were abandoned, swallowed by green silence, but not forgotten, because the Maya didn't just build, they recorded. Their calendars tracked celestial cycles with staggering precision. Venu, equinoxes, eclipses. They knew more about the motion of planets than many later cultures with telescopes. And those long count calendars, they didn't predict the end of the world in 2012. They predicted patterns, long cycles of creation, destruction, and renewal. Cosmic gears turning endlessly. You feel the hum of that knowledge now. It's still here, in the walls, in the stones beneath your feet. And here's where things twist again. Because long before the Spanish arrived, before the jungle claimed everything, the Maya left messages, some in glyphs, others in design. Structures aligned not just to stars, but to acoustics. The temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, clap your hands at its base, and the echo mimics the chirp of a sacred bird. The Quetzal, that's not superstition, that's engineering. You stand, suddenly aware of how alive the city feels. Not in ruins, but in rhythm. You remember another site, Teotihuacan. Its builders are still unknown. It predates the Aztecs by centuries. They called it the place where gods were born. A grid of pyramids and avenues aligned to celestial bodies. A city of 100,000 or more at its peak. And we don't even know the language of its creators. Historians still argue who built it, where they came from, why they vanished. But the symmetry remains. You walk toward the edge of a crumbled plaza. Ahead, two stone eyes stare out from a low temple wall. The face of a jaguar, or a god, or both. You crouch. This isn't just architecture. It's memory. Stone inscribed not with words, but with intention. And despite the jungle's best efforts, it still speaks. It tells you this. Civilization doesn't always vanish in fire. Sometimes, it simply lies down and goes to sleep. Covered, hushed, waiting. And we forget until we trip over a root. Clear path, fly a drone, and suddenly a mountain becomes a pyramid. A hill becomes a palace. A myth becomes real. You walk away from the site, the jungle slowly closing behind you like a curtain. The stone you touched is already disappearing into shadow. But you remember, because now you know how to look. You're walking along a cliffside now, the ocean far below crashing in steady rhythm, like a heartbeat that's not quite yours. The terrain is rugged, windswept stone, gnarled trees, wild grass. But ahead, perched at the edge of the world, are the remains of something much older than the salt and wind make it seem. This isn't a ruin in the jungle or a pyramid beneath sand. It's something stranger, something colder. You've reached the megalithic sites of Europe. And here, the stones don't whisper. They stare. Massive slabs, planted upright. often in circles or aligned lines. Menhirs, dolmens, cromlechs. The names feel old because they are. And the age? In some cases, older than the pyramids. But we treat them like quaint puzzles, odd decorations from forgotten people. You step into the center of a ring. The stones tower over you, their surfaces worn smooth by time, wind, and sheep. No inscriptions, no carvings, just raw presence. Welcome to Karnak, France. Thousands of standing stones stretch across fields here, aligned in rows too orderly to be accidental. But we don't know why. There are theories, of course, astrological alignments, fertility rites, burial markers. But the real answer? Lost. Historians still argue whether Karnak's alignment tracks solstices, lunar standstills, or sacred geography. Some stones line up with distant mountains. Others seem to trace invisible pathways. But nobody knows for sure. You feel it again. That gentle dizziness that comes from standing in a place older than explanation. And this isn't even the strangest example. In Scotland, Orkney's Ring of Brodger and the stones of Stenness rise from wet earth like petrified thoughts. In England, Avebury encircles an entire village. These weren't haphazard creations. They required labor, vision, and, most surprisingly, cooperation. Because these stones are heavy, and without pulleys, cranes, or wheels, moving and planning them would have taken a lot of people. Unified people. People with time, purpose, and organization. And yet, no written records. No surviving oral traditions that explain their meaning. Just myths, hints, and the echo of cold wind between granite. You sit on one of the stones now, warmed slightly by the sun. You wonder about the builders. What kind of society invests this much energy into things that don't house, feed, or defend them? People who believed, you decide, believed in cycles, in stars, in something so big that it deserved the permanence of stone. And here's where it gets even more curious. These megalithic sites stretch far beyond the British Isles and northern France. You find dolmens in Korea, tumuli in Japan, menhirs in Sardinia, and stone circles in Senegal. They're everywhere, and many of them are aligned. To stars, to solstices, to each other. Historians still debate whether this was cultural diffusion or coincidence. But some theories whisper about a global system, a memory shared across oceans, a geometry passed from traveler to traveler, builder to builder. And when you overlay a world map with ancient sacred sites, something eerie emerges. They often fall along similar lines. Great circles, geodesic grids, energy paths, ley lines, some call them. Is it pseudoscience? Maybe. Or maybe it's pattern recognition, echoing from a time before borders. Because no one teaches ants how to form a colony. No one teaches whales to migrate. What if ancient humans, in their own way, were tuned to something similar? You rise and walk the ring's perimeter, fingers grazing stone. The feeling is familiar now. These places are quiet on the surface, but inside, roaring. Think back to Malta. The megalithic temples there, like Hagar Kim and Najdra, are among the oldest freestanding structures in the world, over 5,500 years old. Their doorways and altars hint at ritual. But the most compelling part? They're astronomically aligned. Najdra's entrance marks the equinox, the solstices. Once again, the sky is part of the blueprint. And then there's Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge, the Great Pyramid, each separated by continents and culture, but all with the same fingerprints. Stone, star, story. You walk the last few feet of the circle. The wind cuts harder now. The sea below impatient and loud. And suddenly, it hits you. These sites weren't just built for their time. They were built for ours. The builders didn't write books. They couldn't. But they knew stone would outlast tongue and ink. That a well-placed rock would still be standing when names were long forgotten. You're standing in the middle of a message. It's not written in language, but in form, in scale, in stubbornness. It says, we were here. We knew the sky. We honored it. We built. And we remembered. Will you? Now you're in South America. Not high in the Andes yet, but you're getting there. The air thickens with altitude as you ascend slowly, through winding mountain paths flanked by cloud forest. The trees get smaller, the mist gets colder, then suddenly the view opens. And there it is, terraced into the cliffside, anchored like a crown above the clouds, a city in the sky. Welcome to Machu Picchu. But this isn't just about Machu Picchu tonight. That's only the doorway. Behind it lies a world of mystery that stretches from mountaintop temples to jungle ruins. Because South America is stacked with ancient anomalies, some so well engineered, you'd think they were designed with laser levels and diamond saws. You step onto the first stone platform. The craftsmanship is instantly obvious. The way the blocks interlock, so tightly that not even a sheet of paper can slide between, feels like the work of machines. But it's not. No mortar, no metal tools, just fit. Take Sacsayhuaman above Cusco. Massive megalithic walls zigzag across the hill, built from stones that weigh up to 200 tons. Some are carved with 12 or more edges, fitting into neighboring stones like a 3D jigsaw puzzle, with no repeats. Historians still argue whether the Incas themselves constructed the base layers or inherited them from an earlier, unknown culture, because while the Incas were brilliant engineers, some of these stones seem older, weathered, misaligned with the rest of the Inca aesthetic. You step closer to the wall. The surface is smooth but not polished. It feels heavy, not just in mass, but in implication. Who could have moved stones that size without cranes? You turn the corner, and the mystery deepens. Across the Andean highlands are hundreds of sites like this, Ollantay Tambo, Taipan, Moray, each one with its own mind-bending precision and astronomical orientation. Then there's Pumapunku, near Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. This place breaks the script. Stone blocks litter the area like giant, abandoned puzzle pieces. They're not rough-hewn boulders, they're machined. At least, that's what it looks like. Perfect right angles, drill holes, interlocking notches, grooves so straight, modern engineers marvel. And the material? Not sandstone or limestone, andesite, a volcanic rock harder than steel. Historians still debate how these stones were cut. The conventional answer is hammerstones. But you glance around and wonder, is that really enough? You crouch beside an H-shaped block the size of a car. It looks like a connector piece in a futuristic kit. It's not the mass that's surprising, it's the complexity. And the implication that this block was part of a larger, deliberate system. But a system for what? No one agrees. You walk now through the Sacred Valley, where legends say giants once walked. Or Viracocha, the bearded god of creation, came down from the sky and taught civilization to rise from stone. Myths? Sure, but sometimes myths are just memories in disguise. You arrive next at the Nazca Plain. It's flat, barren, quiet, and yet, look from above, and suddenly, the desert bursts into form. Massive geoglyphs etched into the earth. Monkeys, hummingbirds, hands and spirals, some stretching over 1,000 feet across. You can't see them properly from the ground. They're only visible from the air. And that's the question, why make art that can't be seen? Some say they were ceremonial, pathways for rituals. Others argue they mark underground water. But their scale, their clean lines, they suggest something more. Historians still debate whether the Nazca knew how the lines look from above. But the geometry is so clean, it's as if someone had a blueprint in hand or a bird's eye view. You start connecting the dots, from megaliths to mountaintops, from geoglyphs to temples. The builders of ancient South America weren't just architects. They were planners. They worked with scale, function, astronomy, and, maybe most importantly, legacy. They knew how to last. But then something happened. The stories fade. The people vanish. The jungle swallows cities. The mountains grow quiet. And we, centuries later, show up with drones and wonder how they did it. You sit now at the edge of a crumbling platform, overlooking a valley once alive with ritual and color and song. You let your thoughts drift with the clouds. Maybe these weren't lost civilizations. Maybe they were completed ones. Maybe they didn't fall. Maybe they finished. Maybe they knew they couldn't take it with them, so they left it for us. A question carved in basalt. A story written in alignments. A whisper that says, "We were more than legend." And now it's your turn to remember. You're walking in silence now, through a landscape that feels unfamiliar and yet deeply human. Not a ruin this time, not a pyramid or temple. Just earth, grass, trees, but underneath, layers. You're starting to see it everywhere now. Patterns in hills, mounds that seem too symmetrical, stone fragments peeking through dirt like forgotten bones. You pass through a quiet meadow and realize this might be a collapsed city. You've reached the final question of our journey. What if history isn't a straight line? What if it's a cycle? You look back at everything we've uncovered together. Submerged cities beneath the sea, buried temples older than farming, giant stones shaped like they were molded, the alignment to the stars, the silence where memory should be. And now, you see a different story. Maybe the ancient world wasn't a dim prelude to modern brilliance. Maybe it was a lighthouse, and maybe it wasn't the first. Let that settle in your bones. Because the deeper you dig, literally and metaphorically, the more the timeline starts to bend. Not forward, not backward, circular. You begin to walk faster. Not because you're rushing, but because your mind is racing. Every culture we visited, Maya, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Andean, tells a story of past ages. Lost knowledge. Golden times that ended in floods, fire, skyfall. Always followed by forgetting. Rebuilding. Beginning again. Atlantis. Zep Tepi. The first sun. The time before. Even Plato didn't treat Atlantis as fantasy. He said it was real history passed to Solon by Egyptian priests. That it vanished 9,000 years before his time, right around the end of the last ice age. Coincidence? Historians still argue whether Atlantis ever existed. Most call it allegory, but you've seen too much now to dismiss the rhythm. You reach the edge of cliff. Below, a coastline stretches wide, where land once extended and then drowned. The end of the ice age brought rising seas. For 100 feet of ocean swallowed coastlines where people would have settled, lived, built. But salt water doesn't preserve history. It erases it. And what we call prehistory might be just erased history. So what if civilizations rose before the ones we remember? Built with organic materials, forgotten by time, then buried by catastrophe? What if the ones we know about were just the survivors? You sit, the breeze cool on your face, and you picture it. A high civilization long before Sumer, before Egypt, a world that knew the stars, built in stone, remembered time differently, until something happened. An impact? A solar flare? A tectonic shift? There's scientific evidence that something major hit Earth around 12,800 years ago. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Some believe it caused mass extinctions and a sudden freeze. The timing matches floods and myths. Sea levels jumped, glaciers melted, memory drowned, and the survivors? They built again, remembered fragments, passed them down in myth, story, symbol. We call it folklore, but maybe it's fossilized truth. You breathe deeper now, slower, because now you're thinking not just about the past, but the present. Our world feels invincible. Tall towers, satellites, i.e., but so did Rome. So did Atlantis. So did every last great civilization. History doesn't move in a line. It turns like a wheel. And we may be near the top now, but wheels turn. What are we leaving behind? A warning? A monument? A question? Will the future stumble over our ruins and say, they couldn't have built this? Or worse, will there be no one to ask? You look down again at the coast. You imagine another rising tide, and the silence that follows. So you stand, one last time, because now you carry the memory of what you've seen, not just stones and dates, but patterns. The echoes of greatness, collapse, and a relentless return of curiosity. You know now that civilizations don't just disappear. They whisper, they wait, and when the world is quiet enough, when the noise of certainty fades, they speak again. All you have to do is listen. And now it's time to let go. You've wandered deserts, climbed mountains, wandered through jungles, drifted through myths and ruins, and somewhere along the way, The line between what's real and what's remembered began to blur. That's okay. That's where the most important truths live. The Earth is old, older than we can comprehend. And maybe so are we. Maybe our history is deeper than textbooks allow. Maybe it's carved not just in stone, but in instinct. Memory passed through dreams, DNA, dust. So for now, let the questions rest. Let the images fade like ancient paintings under candlelight. Let the feelings stay with you. Not the facts, not the dates, but the awe. That quiet, grounded awe that says, we're part of something bigger. You're lying in your bed now. The weight of stone and time lifted. Only the hum of a fan. The soft flicker of distant starlight through your window. And your own slow breath remain. This moment, right here, is part of the pattern too. A breath in the endless rhythm. A pause between pulses. A quiet chapter in the story of everything. Sleep well, fellow traveler. You've earned it. And remember, even the greatest civilizations once dreamed beneath stars just like these.